On the morning of June 4th, 1943, a line of Pullman coaches slowed to a grinding halt along the tiny station platform of Mexia, Texas. The townspeople had been gathering since dawn, expecting the arrival of nearly 2,000 prisoners from the defeated Africa Corps. They expected hardened Nazis, men with icy stares and raised chins. What they didn't expect was silence, an eerie, collective silence, as the German soldiers stepped down into the sun and saw something none of them had ever imagined. Before a single guard shouted an order, before a single interrogation began, before the United States ever fired a shot at these particular men, the war inside their minds was already beginning to crumble. Because the first thing they noticed was the lights. Electric lights. Everywhere. Farmhouses miles apart were lit as brightly as city streets back home. Storefronts glowed. Railroad depots glowed. Even barns had floodlights. Germany had been under blackout since 1940. Rural electrification barely existed. For many, this was the first time they had seen uninterrupted illumination stretching to the horizon, and it was the first crack in the worldview Nazism had built for them. One of the prisoners, Obergefreiter Hans Füllmer, later wrote that the moment the train doors opened, it felt as if we had stepped into another world, a world with no war. For 3 years, Nazi propaganda had painted the United States as a nation of racial chaos, weak government, broken factories, and unemployment lines. Yet here, in a random Texas town of barely 7,000 people, the first thing they saw was a country operating at a level Germany's industrial core couldn't match even before Allied bombing began. It would only get more overwhelming from there. The train ride had been the first contradiction. Nazi soldiers expected to be crammed into cattle wagons, denied food and water, and beaten by guards. Instead, they were placed in American passenger coaches with cushioned seats, working toilets, clean sheets, and regular meals. Some were stunned into silence. Others whispered privately, "This must be a trick. They want us weak before interrogation." But the kindness wasn't a trick, it was standard procedure. The United States followed the Geneva Convention almost obsessively. Not out of sentimentalism, but because the War Department calculated that good treatment would encourage surrender and discourage fanatic resistance. What no one predicted was the psychological side effect. When German soldiers saw how well America treated its enemies, many began questioning everything they thought they knew about the world. As the men lined up for processing, something else caught their attention. Cars. Not military trucks, but private automobiles parked in rows near the station. Germans stared at the polished Buicks, Fords, and Studebakers as if they were museum pieces. Back home, civilian car production had ended years earlier. Fuel rationing had drained daily life of mobility. Only the privileged or politically connected could even hope to own a functioning vehicle. Yet here, in a place most Germans would have considered the sticks, every teacher, shopkeeper, and farmer seemed to drive a car. A farmhand leaning against a pickup truck was, to them, as shocking as seeing a Berlin street fruit seller with a Mercedes. For many prisoners, this was the second crack in their ideological armor. If the propaganda machine could lie about America's poverty, what else had it lied about? But the single moment that broke many soldiers came from something deceptively small: the supermarket truck. As the POWs waited under guard, a large delivery truck pulled into the station to offload crates for a local store. The tailgate swung open, revealing boxes of oranges, bananas, canned goods, bread, cheese, and packaged meats. Ordinary grocery items in the United States, unremarkable to the locals. But for Germans, especially those who had lived through rationing since 1939, it was a punch to the chest. Bananas hadn't been seen in Germany since before the war. Butter was tightly rationed. Meat was almost non-existent. Fresh fruit was a luxury reserved for high-ranking party officials. Yet here, in this remote American town, food that would have caused riots in Hamburg was being unloaded casually on a weekday morning. Prisoners stared. One of them whispered, "This is not possible. A poor country cannot have this." Another muttered, "We have lost. We just didn't know it yet." The guards didn't understand the reaction. To Americans, overflowing grocery trucks were as normal as telephone poles or mailboxes. To the POWs, it felt like being struck by a truth they couldn't fight. America's war machine wasn't a miracle of emergency, mobilization. It was simply the industrial expression of a society already rich beyond anything Germany could ever match. As the column marched toward the camp, the prisoners noticed yet another detail. Every house they passed had a refrigerator. They could see them through windows, humming quietly in the kitchens. In Germany, a refrigerator was an exotic luxury. Even many officers didn't have one. And this wasn't even an industrial city. This was rural Texas. Farm families had refrigerators, electric stoves, running water, and shelves full of food jars. The POWs exchanged glances. What kind of nation gave its farmers a standard of living better than German officers? Later that night, after the men were assigned bunks and given their first American meal, fresh meatloaf, potatoes, bread with real butter, salad, and coffee, camp administrators noticed something strange. The expected hostility wasn't there. No snarling Nazi salutes, no angry confrontations, no riots. Instead, the Germans were unusually quiet. Many lay awake, staring at the ceiling, processing the impossible contrast between the country they had been told was corrupt and collapsing, and the one they had just walked into. Many POWs later said the same thing in interviews, letters, and diaries. The war was lost the moment we saw America. In what they saw on that first day wasn't military might. It wasn't tanks, planes, or battleships. It was something more powerful. A society functioning at such a level of organization, productivity, and prosperity that war for them was no longer about ideology. It was about mathematics. Germany could fight battles. America could make the weapons that decided them. More importantly, America could do it without breaking a sweat. One prisoner put it best. We realized the truth before any interrogation, before any questioning, before any camp routine. We saw how Americans lived, and we knew we could not defeat a nation that lived like this. The collapse had begun. By the second day inside the camp, the German soldiers began noticing patterns that to them made no logical sense. The guards rotated shifts with precision, arriving exactly on time, never late, never hurried, never exhausted. In Germany, even before the bombing campaigns intensified, efficiency had been deteriorating for years. Trains ran behind schedule. Supplies were inconsistent. Civilian workers were pulled into emergency labor. Nothing felt predictable. But here, in a country that wasn't even fighting a land war on its own soil, everything moved like a machine calibrated to perfection. Breakfast arrived at the exact same minute each day. Showers produced hot water on demand. Lights never flickered. Workshops had replacement parts stacked neatly in labeled bins. The Germans didn't understand how America could be at war and still maintain such a high-functioning civilian foundation. It didn't fit their mental model. During processing, American officers interviewed prisoners one by one. The Germans expected intimidation. Interrogations in Europe were often hostile. Instead, the Americans asked calm, methodical questions: name, rank, unit, hometown, skills, education. Many POWs were surprised when officers took note of their civilian trades: mechanics, carpenters, musicians, machine operators. The United States, it turned out, automated feeders. And perhaps the most shocking detail: most of these machines were owned by a single family. Didn't intend to lock them in cages. It intended to put them to work. Under Geneva Convention rules, POWs could labor in non-military roles, and America had a massive shortage of manpower due to millions serving overseas. The prisoners soon learned something even more astonishing. Their labor was not exploited. They were paid, not much, but enough to buy items at the camp canteen, something unthinkable in a German POW camp. This simple fact became another fracture in the ideological barrier. Nazi doctrine emphasized strength through brutality, glory through sacrifice, and authority through fear. Yet these Americans, according to the propaganda, weak, decadent, and capitalist, were running the cleanest, fairest prison system the Germans had ever seen. It wasn't softness, it was confidence. A confident nation doesn't fear treating its enemies well. A struggling nation can't. One of the first POW work assignments took a small group of German mechanics to a Texas farm. A POW named Dieter Koch froze when he saw the barn's mechanical grain auger. He had used similar equipment in Germany, except the German version served an entire village. Here it was just one farm's standard tool. Dieter later wrote, "I felt ashamed. We were told America was a place of disorder, but everything I saw was more advanced than anything at home. And for him and many others, shame quickly turned into clarity. Germany wasn't fighting a weaker country. Germany was fighting the world's most industrially advanced society, and had no idea. As the days passed, the Germans began comparing stories. One group had worked at a lumber mill and witnessed machines cutting boards faster than 20 men could. Another saw automated bottling lines at a soda plant. Another cleaned a school and discovered that even rural classrooms had electric fans, typewriters, and modern plumbing. A few prisoners couldn't believe what they saw: free lunch programs for children. "This is a rich country," one murmured. "A country that feeds its children for free will never lose a war." Even the most loyal Nazis felt a knot forming in their stomachs. Some tried to fight the growing doubt. They insisted the Americans were showing off, trying to manipulate them. But deep down, they knew the truth. You cannot stage an entire nation. You cannot fake infrastructure. You cannot manufacture prosperity everywhere at once. The most jarring moment came when a sick German prisoner was taken to a local hospital. He expected a military infirmary. Instead, he found a civilian facility cleaner and better equipped than most German officer hospitals. Stainless steel instruments, sterilization rooms, X-ray equipment, an entire floor dedicated to children. The doctors didn't treat him roughly. They treated him like any other patient. When he returned to camp, he was visibly shaken. "If this is what their hospitals look like for ordinary people," he said, "then we are fighting a giant." The shock continued in the canteen. German prisoners found items they hadn't seen in years: real chocolate, peanut butter, cigarettes from multiple brands, and fresh fruit. The guards explained casually, "This is all from rationed civilian supplies." Rationed? To the Germans, America's rationing looked like pre-war luxury. If this was scarcity, what did abundance look like? But the single event that cemented the psychological collapse came during a long train transfer of POW labor detachments across the Midwest. As the train moved through Kansas, Nebraska, and Iowa, the Germans stared wide-eyed at the endless horizon of farmland. Not just fields, but fields filled with tractors, combines, grain elevators, and well-fed livestock. They passed through towns where every house had a car. Every barn had electric lines days. The scale broke them. In Germany, industry was centralized and already faltering. Farms were struggling, and food shortages were rising. Here, the Germans saw a country where even the most remote communities had industrial power, mechanization, and surplus. At one point, a POW whispered, "This country is a factory disguised as a nation." Another replied, "No, it is a nation of factories." The guards overheard the comment and laughed, but for the prisoners it was not a joke. It was a realization, a terrifying one. What struck the Germans most wasn't wealth, it was calm. America was at war, yet ordinary life felt stable. People smiled, children played, stores were full. Everywhere they looked, they saw a society that had mobilized for war while still living better than Germany did in peacetime. To the POWs, the contrast was almost painful. They had grown up hearing about the superiority of German discipline, German order, German science. Yet here, the United States had quietly built a standard of living and industrial base so powerful that it allowed the country to fight a world war without sacrificing its civilian prosperity. For many prisoners, this was the moment they knew, truly knew, that Germany could never win. The American soldier was dangerous. The American tank was powerful, but the American citizen, living in a country of abundance and machinery and limitless energy, was the real threat. Because a nation that lives well fights with confidence. And a nation that fights with confidence cannot be intimidated, only resisted. As one POW wrote years later, "We realized something frightening. You were not even fighting us with your full strength." That realization spread quietly across every barracks building that night. And for many Germans, the war ended in their minds long before it ended on any battlefield. The turning point, the moment German POWs collectively understood the true scale of American power, did not happen on a farm, in a barracks, or inside a canteen. It happened inside a factory. Not a weapons plant, not an assembly line guarded by military police, but a perfectly ordinary civilian factory in the American Midwest. A group of POWs had been assigned to clean and perform simple maintenance under supervision. They expected machinery, of course. Every country had factories. But they did not expect what they saw when the foreman flipped a switch to demonstrate the production line. The machines woke up in a synchronized roar, belts turning, gears locking, presses slamming, conveyors flowing, and workers moving with clockwork efficiency. What stunned the Germans was not the noise, it was the scale. This was not a specialized military plant. This was a factory producing farm equipment, tractors, plows, replacement parts. One POW, Johann Bremer, froze in front of a metal press the size of a small house. He had seen a similar machine once in Bremen. But it was the pride of the city, protected, guarded, and reserved for critical military output. Here, they had 4 of them. 4. And this was just one factory in a country filled with cities Germany had never heard of. When Johann asked the foreman how long it took to build one of the machines, the man shrugged and said, "A few weeks. We can order another if we need one." Order another. As if industrial giants could simply be reordered like a new broom. The POWs stared. To them, these machines were irreplaceable national assets. To Americans, they were equipment. What broke them further was the workers. Teenagers, middle-aged men, women with rolled-up sleeves, retirees, immigrants, all operating complex machinery with practiced ease. In Germany, entire factories struggled to stay open because young men were at the front. Here, the workforce was endless, trained, motivated, confident. "Anyone can learn this in a few weeks," a foreman said, guiding a POW away from a hydraulic arm. But the Germans understood something deeper. America's industrial machine wasn't just powered by steel and electricity. It was powered by people. Millions of civilians contributing to a war effort while still maintaining their normal lives. Germany didn't have that. Germany never had that. The next shock came in the warehouse, where the POWs expected to see scarcity, crates carefully rationed, parts locked away. Instead, they found mountains of materials, steel coils stacked to the ceiling, rubber tires in endless rows, wooden pallets filled with tools. A POW whispered, "This must be their entire strategic reserve." The foreman laughed. "Reserve? No, this is just the weekly shipment." Weekly. The word rippled through the German group like a tremor. Germany couldn't gather this much material in a month, sometimes 3. And even then, much of it was shipped straight to weapon factories. Here, it was just one facility's weekly restock. But the moment that truly shattered them arrived in the form of a simple conversation between 2 American workers. One complained about overtime. The other said he was thinking of taking a vacation next month. A vacation. In the middle of a world war. German POWs looked at each other in disbelief. German civilians in 1943 were working 16-hour shifts, sleeping in basements, and rationing everything from bread to toilet paper. Vacations were a pre-war memory. Yet here, in a nation supplying half the world with war material, workers still had the luxury of planning time off. That wasn't morale. That was industrial supremacy so overwhelming that daily life barely felt the strain of global conflict. The climax deepened during a lunch break. The POWs sat under guard, eating sandwiches they still found shockingly generous, thick slices of cheese, real meat, fresh fruit. But what stunned them most were the Americans' lunchboxes. The variety, the quantity, the normality of abundance. German workers in wartime ate watery soup and stale bread. American workers ate like kings by comparison. One POW stared at a worker's lunch, roast chicken, vegetables, an apple, and a slice of pie, and muttered, "This cannot be. Not during war." A guard overheard him and replied casually, "It's just leftovers." Leftovers. A word that hit harder than any propaganda. The German officer among them felt his stomach turn. If Americans ate like this during war, what was their life like in peace? The question lingered like a weight no one could push off their chest. Later that afternoon, the POWs saw the loading docks. And that's when the last piece of hope many had been clinging to finally collapsed. Freight trains lined the tracks, dozens of them, stretching far beyond what the prisoners could see. Locomotives puffed steam as cranes swung crates of machinery, tools, and vehicle parts onto flat cars. And these weren't war trains. They were civilian supply trains. Germany's entire wartime rail system was overloaded, damaged, and running on fumes. Here, the civilian logistics network alone looked like a military superpower,